Okay, we're live. Well, welcome, Victoria. What have you got going there, Victoria? What is that?
I've got a what do we say where in Scotland? Slangivar.
Yeah, the toast. Yeah,
Slangivar in Scottish. You mean here we just say cheers, I suppose.
Cheers. Yeah.
But I don't have any gin and tonic because I've run out of tonic, so I'm having a
That's a good test. Well, up there in Cottesloe, I didn't think that was allowed.
What, gin and tonic?
No, to run out.
Oh, to run out. Oh, I know. It's ridiculous. It just shows how many I've had in the last few days, doesn't it?
Well, let's start with telling the folks a bit about you. The first thing is let's start with your name. Okay.
My name is Victoria Mackay. I have two Facebooks actually. One is Victoria van den Hoogen, which is my Dutch-German husband's name. And we've kept it, obviously, which is a bit strange because some of the, my children use Mackay, which is my maiden name, because it's easier for them. And one of them, well, two of them use Mackay, and one uses Mackay, and two of them still use van den Hoogen. So I keep van den Hoogen for that reason. But most people here would know me as Victoria Mackay. Around where I live and in my writing arena, I would be known as Victoria Mackay.
Now, a very good story is how you came up, why you don't have the same spelling as me. Okay? I think that's a very good story.
Oh, yes, well, yeah.
That is almost worth a short story in itself.
It is. Well, my father was given away, I suppose, you would call it, to his spinster aunt, who was his mother's sister. My grandmother had 9 sons and a daughter. Good Irish stock she was, and her husband was Scottish. So they, and my father was somewhere in amongst that, near the top of the group. And obviously her sister, who was unmarried and had no intentions of being married and was more affluent, I suppose, was given my father, who brought him up as her own boy. But he knew his family, he knew his mother, and they lived not too far from each other, just in slightly different circumstances. And so her name was Mitchell, Violet Mitchell. And so my father grew up with this sort of Violet Mitchell story and his name being Mackay. So I think at school he must have written Mitchell or something, because when my father married my mother, he, on the marriage certificate, put the name down as M-C-K-A-Y, where our family name is M-A-C-K-A-Y. All my other cousins, and there are 42 grandchildren in our family, half of those are the Mackays, and they're all M-A-Cs. So my father put M-A-C. So it meant that afterwards, us, my sisters and I, had to be Mackay, because that was on our birth certificates. Afterwards.
Same pronunciation, slightly different spelling. But now tell us about your Clearly you originate from Scotland. So tell us about your adventures from Scotland to Perth.
Oh, gosh, that's a long journey. I'll make it quick because it could be quite a long journey. I actually started studies in Scotland, and then I went to, decided I wanted to study in Germany. And after a short living down in Cambridge, I went on to Germany. And I just I had spoke German and French, but not fluently, but well. And I went off to Germany and applied there to study at university, with a few catches along the way, that I knew somebody who lived there and they gave me an apartment in their house and so on. And I studied in Germany for most of my studies I did in Germany. And then I went to France for a while and studied in France. And then I came back to Germany.
What were your studies in? What were you studying?
Well, I started in psychology, and
Okay.
I did languages and in English. Obviously, English is my first language, so it was easy to get through things, to get, pretty high grades in English. But everything else I did completely in German. So I have a bit of I suppose, a talent for languages, and I speak German. I speak fluent German. A German person would not know that I'm not German until I say so, and I say something. They say, "Where do you come from?" And I say, "Oh, I'm Scottish." And they, "Oh, I thought it was Hamburg or something." So, so I loved living in Germany. I loved France too. And eventually I lived down in Trier. I met my husband from Germany. And I lived down in Trier on the French and Luxembourg border. So we spoke all three languages down in that corner. And I liked living there too. And I had my children there. And when I decided to leave Germany, I went back to live in St. Andrews, where I come from. And I knew that I wanted to do some more studies, but I also wanted time out to do other things. And I set up a business in St. Andrews. I looked for a beautiful old building that I wanted it to be an old building. And I had an idea of putting in, which sounds a bit contradictory, but gourmet and health foods. So I set up what became known as the Healthgurmeet. And one part of the shop was totally devoted to health foods and all the sort of vitamins and things. And the other part of the shop was all the gourmet foods like, French duck and this and that and whatever, parfaits and
wine,
cheese counters.
In your shop was wine, but in your shop was wine considered healthy, or?
We didn't have wine in the shop.
Oh, no.
I didn't sell wine.
Oh, dear. Okay.
No, we just gourmet foods, unusual, very truffle and that sort of thing.
No truffles.
Yeah, and all sorts of things that you couldn't get in other places. So I did that for about 2 years, and it was doing so well that I had, a lot of staff working there and so on, because it became very well known. St. Andrews is a very interesting town. It's a little bit like when you drive into it's like coming into Camelot. It's got beautiful buildings and arches, and then the big university and the oceans on. So the sea, and of course there are a lot of people there who could afford to buy these very special foods and everything else. And I did very well there. And after 2 years, a Dutchman actually came and wanted to buy the shop off me. And I decided then I could go back and do some more study at Dundee University, which I did. And I did human resource management and industrial psychology.
But then how did you eventually get here?
Well, that was part of why I did the study. I studied human resource management and industrial psych, because I felt my sister was here. I had a sister who lived here, and I had visited her with the children. And because I went back to Scotland with the 3 children on my own and took them out here on holiday. And then I decided that I might like to do some work here or live here for a couple of years while the children were still young enough to sort of adapt and then go back. I had no intentions of living here. And I was offered a position here, a contract that suited my skills and that they were looking for. And they offered me that position. And that's why I came to stay for 2 years and do the contract.
Okay, so that's actually how you got here. And how long have you been here now?
Oh, my goodness. I came here in the 80s. So I think it was 86, 87 when I came here. So quite.
Wow, okay, that's a while back. Okay.
But a long time.
Victoria, since you've been here, right, you're well known as a biographer.
Mm-hmm.
Just tell us a bit about how your being a biographer came about.
Well, when I first came here, I wasn't.
What I'm going to say is that a lot of this goes out to people who are writers. Okay?
Right.
What we're doing here. But
well, I think
writing a biography, I think, for people is a bit of like, what? Yeah, that's very different, So would you mind, because did you always write? Did you always
Well, at the start, did I always write? Because I did other things, but I always wrote. And of course, I studied for many years, even through having children and all that. So I was always writing things. But I came from a very dysfunctional family. And my childhood had many challenges. And so I found as a child that by writing things, whether it was poems or stories or whatever, that I was able to rationalize what was going on around me. And I was able to find some sort of reasoning that suited my thinking. And I was able to escape into pretense and that sort of thing. So it was cathartic for me, I think. And
it was also giving you some sort of context to your reality, is what you were living in a day-to-day.
I think it was more about escaping my reality, really. I wrote about things, but escaping the reality, it was cathartic. I was able to rationalize things. I was able to imagine myself somewhere else and all sorts of nice places and less upheaval. But and even at school, I was always writing, I was very good at writing and did very well at school. So throughout my life, I've always had lots of manuscripts. I've written all through my life about things that have happened to me, and I've only sort of skimmed the things we're talking about tonight. But there were lots of happenings, and one of them, of course, coming to Australia with 3 young children under 8, So that was quite an undertaking. And what happened to us during those 2 years and how we decided to stay and so on. But I've always written things down. So I've got masses of manuscripts that I've never published. Might one day do a memoir or something of my own. So,
but I ask you a question. Is, why do you think some people write? Well, there's a slight difference here. Some people call it journaling. Journaling means like, this is what I did in the day. It was Monday, 8 o'clock, I woke up and I went to work. That's journaling, okay? But you were writing, as you say, like a cathartic process. What actually do you think drives some people to do that, to write?
Well, I think in my
case, as opposed to...
Yeah. Well, it's different for everybody, but for me, it was definitely escapism in a lot of ways. And even when I've written there's some things I've written throughout my life that are absolutely the truth, but they're always changed or, sort of a bit of fantasies brought in because it was easier to make it more interesting or to find a resolution that didn't actually happen, So I think people write for various reasons. Some people just write because they love writing and they like to write stories about other people rather than about or fantasy people or create subjects. What I like to actually work around a subject, including myself.
Okay. So do you think it was that led you? Well, how did you actually get into the work of doing biographies? How did that come to you?
Right. So when I first came to Australia, I worked on this contract. And then I, in the middle of that, I actually started, through the work that I did in those 2 years, set up a consultancy because I was able to move on from that into other arenas where I could have my own office and set up a proper consultancy and have other consultants. And during that time, I used to write interviews or do interviews with people that I found it very interesting when I first came here in the 80s and 90s in Perth, because all sorts of things were happening. We had all the sort of political upheavals and entrepreneurs who were creating wonderful things, and some of them then collapsed and went bankrupt. And there were all sorts of intriguing stories here. So there were very interesting people around, and I became known for being able to interview people. One of my friend was an editor with magazines like BRW and Mining Monthly and so on. And a lot of people would give an interview to me when they wouldn't to someone else, because they felt, well, they sort of trusted me, that it was authentic. I didn't go away and make things up that they hadn't said or add titillating things. So I met a lot of interesting businessmen during that time. And one of them was Lang Hancock. And Lang, I used to do interviews for Lang. And he was a very interesting man. I liked Lang Hancock a lot. And when I went to the boardroom, his table was the length of, a tennis court probably, and the boardroom table. And he would always sit with his legs over the side of the chair and kick while he was talking. So every recording I had of him was like this kicking on the chair. And each time I said to him, you're kicking, he'd stop for 2 minutes and he'd start again. So I got used to it. And Lang then said to me, I have a very good friend, a businessman, and he would like to write his biography, his story. Would you be interested? So he introduced me to Stan Perrin, who is a bit of an icon. Stan is an icon here. And
he's very, very much, Stan Perrin is very much an icon here.
And then at that time, he was already a wealthy man and well-known and had done interesting things. And I remember when I wrote his first book, that's when he introduced me to Stan, and Stan and I got on, and I wrote the first book for him. And I remember he was worth 680 million.
Back then?
Yes. And we used to have a joke about it. Stan, we're 680 million, and he'd say, where's that missing dollar? This little joke about, he was always thinking of the dollars and the little bits we were thinking. So I remembered he was worth 680 million, and that was in the first book. And when I wrote his second book, which was in 2012, he was worth almost 4 billion.
Yeah.
So,
he over here, he was a legend. He was a legend, yeah. So,
yeah,
but then, but you became quite well known for doing the one for Lang and the one for Stan, right? So you became quite well known out of those works that you did.
Yeah, and I sort of learned all the secrets, like for instance, how Lang and people will say, Lang did this and Stan did that. And I think, no, they didn't actually. What happened was this, and this. But I don't talk about people's private lives, but even though I'm in on them a lot of the time because I'm with them for a long period of time. But with Lang and Stan, they had a very interesting friendship because they met a way back used to have lunch in King's Park. And Lang Stan got into a few mining deals with Lang where it just didn't work, manganese and all sorts of things. And then he came with this iron ore thing. I know there's iron ore, and there was embargo on iron ore. And he talked Stan into lending him £1,000 to fire up petrol, to fire up the aircraft, his little, I think it's an Austin or something aircraft, and go around and peg the iron ore. And Stan thought about it, and he went away and he said, no, I'll give you 500 quid, not 1,000, but any iron ore you find, not just Mount Tom price, any iron ore, I'm in on. Because he only wanted to tell him about Mount Tom price. As it turned out, Hammersley Iron, the whole of all the mining rights that Gina has, Stan gets 15% of that in perpetuity.
I know, so it's a huge, it's a mind-boggling deal. I think anybody who's in mining,
yes.
Anybody who's in mining in WA and even in the world.
Yeah, 15% of all that money. Yeah.
But tell me, how did you get from? So you wrote a lot, and you probably got baskets and boxes full of notes and scribbles and half-done manuscripts, and you've done the biographies. which must lead you in along the way with biographies. You meet a lot of other interesting characters and see that would be a good person in another story. So how did you actually make the leap from being a biographer to a novelist? How did you do
that? This book that I've written now isn't a novel. It's based on true events. It's a memoir, but based on true events with names and places changed. So it isn't a real novel. Everything in it is true, but it's just rewritten. So,
okay, for the audience, can we just clarify that? It's not a biography, it's not a memoir, it's a novel.
No, it's not a novel. It's not a novel. It is a memoir.
It's a memoir. Okay.
It's a memoir because it's based on true events, but it's obviously I've changed the names and the places to protect people and so on. But I worked with the person that this is written about for 3 years on this book. But before that, I had written a couple of novels, which Karen, I've been talking to her about, but I never really got round to, and they're very good novels, I've given them to my readers. I never really got round to pushing them because there was always someone coming along and wanting a book done or wanting something edited or, so I often abandoned my own stuff that I've written. So I've got a couple of manuscripts sitting there that should be out, but I haven't done that yet. But this one I spent 3 years on because I had a couple of clients in between where I was doing other things for them, which is more money earning, where this was something I really became all engaging for me, and it wasn't about.
Did you feel you had to write this book?
Well, I started off. I knew the girl, and I knew her before this harrowing journey started for her. I knew her in other countries. I knew her in London. I lived in London for a while. And she lived over there too, as my son did, and they were very close friends. So when she then went on this journey, which turned out to be sort of catastrophic in a lot of ways, we lost track a little bit. I knew about how it all started and so on, but I thought she was living a wonderful life over there, had a child, living on a property and a farm and all that sort of thing. And it was only when we sort of reconnected and I began to realize that she was not living this life that everyone thought. She was actually in danger in some ways, her health, her mental health, and also physically. And she was sort of saying to me, oh, look, it's all my fault and I just have to be better and so on. And I said, look, Lucy, I call her, Lucy, this is not right. This is not your fault. I need you to look at this. So that's how it all started. And then when I did say when they sort of, the relationship ended, and it was worse after the ending, sort of the cut, I said, you need to write this. You need to write because this will be cathartic for you. This will help you to rationalize. Just take notes. And she said, I can't write. But then I got her to send me them. One thing that I do for people when they want to do a memoir themselves, and I'm just mentoring them, I will set up what I call a navigation pane. And I will give them just headings to work with once I've listened to them and say, don't think linear, just think about these events that you've spoken of and write about them. And we'll jigsaw it, sort of thing. So that's what we started doing for her, just thinking, oh, she can do a little memoir, 100 pages or so. And then it took on a life of its own. And one traumatic thing after another happened and happened and happened. And then I more or less started just writing the book. And we didn't see each other in the whole 3 years because she couldn't leave for legal reasons. And we had COVID. So
she had what?
We had the COVID pandemic.
Okay.
She also had legal reasons why she couldn't get out of the country. And talked on the phone regularly most days, and we emailed each other. She would write something, email it to me, and that's how this book came about.
Wow, so, that's incredible. Okay, but this thing that I'm like, okay, I'm a what's the expression for the LGBTQ plus group? I identify as a white male heterosexual.
He, him, you're he, him, his.
I don't know what that is. I don't know what group.
I saw something on television.
Doesn't report anything.
You've got your own.
Having lived in Africa, mostly in South Africa for a long time, I worked a lot of it, you deal there with a lot of third world problems, okay? Like getting water, getting a loaf of bread to feed the children, stuff like that. But here in WA and Australia, these issues with women seem to be more pronounced in my own personal experience. Okay, well, maybe I was just seeing third world problems a lot, but these problems and I would expect these women sort of experience a lot of PTSD as well in this process, and I don't know how our mental health organizations and government institutions deal with this.
I don't know. Well, I don't think it's Western Australia. I think in Australia in general and New Zealand in particular, there's a lot of domestic abuse. But I don't think everyone, the extent of it is some people it's much more, it's to a greater extent than other people. And I think some people are more inclined to accept it as the norm. And men have the same problem sometimes. You can also get men who have been ostracized and bullied and whatever. But I find not everybody experiences it the same because, but other people, it gets out of control and they just can't deal with it.
A fellow I interviewed a couple of weeks back, Fios, he wrote basically from the other side, from the man's side.
Who was this?
His name is Fios Papadopoulos. So he wrote a book. He's one of Karen's authors as well. So he wrote a book. It's like the other side of the male. And mostly he writes about the fact that men say, no, it's not that bad. I'll push on. It'll all come right. No big deal. Where actually it is. And nobody ever seems to draw a line in the sand and say, enough's enough. Talking about his book and what you're telling me now.
Yes, I think men do tend to, say, don't worry about it. Let's have a drink and, no worries, mate. And but women tend to band together and want to solve the problem and help you. And so we tend to get, in Lucy's case, she didn't have a lot of that either because she came from a bit of a dysfunctional situation in her own background. She didn't have a good relationship with her mother. She experienced similar sort of put down and bullying as a child, and it made her, when she was in a conflict situation, that she froze, and always was trying to sort of make the other person happy, to pacify the situation. So she had lived with a narcissist type relationship at home, and then she went into this other relationship, and like a lot of people, she was in her late 30s, and she meets this man who's a good-looking man. He's single as well as she is, which doesn't often happen. No children, no ex-wives, nothing. The two of them, young people, late 30s, and you think you found the one. And when she met him, and an interesting thing, she met him on Tinder, which is something that in London, when she was living there, is something you just do. You have a drink with someone. It's not all that, it's not uncommon. But when she came back to Perth, And she thought, oh, I'll meet a few people. There were just dreadful dates. And then this man turns up. And they only knew each other for about 6 weeks before he had to go back to where he was from. And she was going off to London. And then she went over to meet him in New Zealand. And she got pregnant. So it was a bit like they wanted to have a child.
Can I just stop you for a minute? I've always loved that phrase when they talk about women, they say, she got pregnant. Like she did it by herself.
No, they wanted this child, both of them.
Oh, they did? Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, both of them decided that they were from dysfunctional family. They want child. They're 30, near the end of their 30s, and they get pregnant. But when she went out there, she realized there were red flags. Before she went there were red flags during the time before she actually went to live on his property with him. And then, but you ignore these things because you keep thinking, well, I need a family for my child, and he'll be different once everything's settled, once we're in the house, once we're on our own property, the farm, and everything's going to be wonderful. And in the meantime, she is going to inherit quite an inheritance. So she got onto the property. She didn't realize that he actually didn't have all that much money in the property. Most of it was mortgaged, and another sibling had more money in it. And when the relationship deteriorated over time, and which started off as control techniques and coercive abuse, and then became very physical, and her inability to actually have control over her own finances, and then having put most of her inheritance into this property, she found herself trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. And of course, you try to make the people back home think you're living this wonderful life. You don't want to admit that you've failed, and you don't have a very good relationship with your mother where you can go home to, So the relationship deteriorated, and eventually it reached a point where she didn't have any control over her own finances, her own life, couldn't put petrol in the car, and this sort of thing was all controlled on the farm. And so that's how
So all of this you put. Have you got a copy of your book?
Here it is. Here. Yeah, it's a rather beautiful book. Karen does lovely books. Actually, you'll notice her
A captive in his butterfly glass.
Yes. And then it says based on true events.
Okay.
So what it says in the back, and I think this is the main theme of it, sometimes your horror becomes so much a part of you that it doesn't seem like horror anymore. You just think, oh, well, is it that bad? Because, and you've been in South Africa as well, my husband was South African.
But do you think your studies with psychology helped you with this, with understanding this?
Oh, I think so. And I think my own background, my own childhood helped me to understand how you can you can be in a situation that you don't actually, it's not good, but you don't actually realize how bad it is until you look back and see how it's affected you. Because a dysfunctional family does affect you as a person in the relationships you get into.
Well, a lot of them, they don't actually happen overnight, and there's a switch when they flip. I
think it's
a gradual thing.
What do you mean it's a gradual thing?
Well, I mean, the picture you're painting of this lady when she moved onto the farm with this fella, and then he didn't appear to be as he was, as she originally thought. It didn't happen overnight.
It doesn't happen overnight, but the person, that type of person anyway, he was a narcissistic person, and that was part of his makeup because he had past relationships with the same. And since this relationship's finished, it's in another relationship which is similar. So that person target is a magnet for people like that. She would have been a magnet because of her type of upbringing and she would have put up with that behavior, not finding it too bad, because she's used to that sort of horror, you know? She's used to being treated badly and not loved and cherished and so on. And then you begin to accept that more easily than somebody who hasn't. That wasn't the sort of case that I grew up in, but there were certain things there that were very dysfunctional. And of course, you carry that with you. And if you see it with psychology, it helps you to understand perhaps, but you do carry that with you. And even though you think that has gone, it never goes. You only learn to manage it and recognize the pitfall.
Victoria, so what now? You did the biographies?
Can I just say something? Can I say something before we move on there about people? When you look at entrepreneurs, for instance, and people who are some of the people I've written for, one of the things I find about biographies and when people say, "Oh, why do you write biographies?" It's fascinating because you meet someone who's got a story and they're going to tell you this story, and you're going to write it down, and it's going to be lovely. And then you hear these other bits and pieces, and you have to work with this person and find, particularly people who are very successful, what was the drive? Because most of us are not driven like that, to become billionaires and so on. Stan Perrin grew up the poorest of the poor in a mining town. So what's driven him? And he has his ideas of that, but once you start to work with someone and get into the psychology of it, you can see the driver, what has driven this man. And then once you reach that point, it's very interesting how much more open the person becomes. Do you know what I mean?
No, I get it. But do you think that you might write your next novel? I mean, this first one was about a woman. You might those things you're speaking of, about what actually drove the person, and have a character who has those things.
I have put that in the biographies. I usually reach that point where I can say, can I use this? And there are certain things people don't want to be used. But once you say to them, look, we'll do it in an elegant way, I think it will be interesting for people. People want you to write a biography where they've planted the garden with all the daffodils and the tulips, and, summer comes and winter comes and it's all up. But actually the garden's full of a lot of little weeds as well. And it's once people open up about that, and that's what a good biographer will do, will take you to that place where you're willing to open up about things you normally wouldn't, as long as it's handled in a particular way. You know what I mean? So, what was the question you asked me there?
I'm saying, so your next book?
My next book, I don't know. There's going to be a follow-on to this book, because the people that have read it have had readers while I was writing it, and I also had readers who are pre-launch readers, and they've all come back and said, "Oh, well, is Lucy okay? Is Ruby okay? I need to know." And I thought, when I was partly finished this book, that I thought I was finished. And then people said, "Oh, but I need to know about this." And then I wrote about a court case, and then I wrote the next bit. And I thought, that's it, done now. We're up to 300 odd pages here, 100,000 words.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a pretty good ending, but it still left things open. And now people are asking what happened next. And so much has happened next that I've set Lucy up again to start the next round. So
so
I might be caught up again.
It's starting to sound like it's going to be a trilogy or a series.
I don't know. Well, maybe a second book anyway. Yeah.
What? A second book?
Maybe. Well, it will be a second book, we think, because so many people say, I need to know. And I've said, oh, maybe I'll do a second book. And, sign me up for that. So it is quite an intriguing book, because what I found is people have said, I relate to that. And I'm surprised at the people who relate to it. And when I was on the Jenny Seaton show interview on Curtin Radio, when I came out, people had already phoned in and said, oh my goodness, I related to that. One woman was 82 years of age.
That's
and
amazing.
She wanted to find the book. So I'm surprised even Jenny had her things that she said. She said, I lived this. And I was sort of, I'm quite surprised at how many people know people. Or
so will you take all of these characters from this first book and then they'll carry on into the second book?
Yes, yeah, I think so. Yeah. I'd like to change it a little bit. I was tempted at one point to fictionalize because I thought, oh, this would make a great little Netflix or something,
But do you find that if you fictionalize it, that gives you more degrees of freedom to play with the characters?
Well, no, I'm not that type of person. I like my characters to be solid, real people. But I think, even in my novels, the ones that I've written and put to the side, the novel was really about real stories. And one of them is about a girl's relationship with her father, for instance, and the whole intrigue of this story. And it was really based on some of my own life, and my father's life. And when I was writing it, it was giving me a lot of interest in that I was turning these people into what I wanted them to be. Do you know what I mean? So, but it was still based on real
people. Aren't you being a fiction writer then?
Well, fiction to some extent, but I like to base it on people, real people.
I do the same. Look, all of my novels are crime thrillers, but they're all based on true events, just like yours.
You just look them up from the start, do you?
No. They're all based on true stories. Yeah.
Oh, they're true stories. Okay, right. Yeah.
Things that happened to me in my life.
It's got to be a couple of years.
So, but I've got to change the names and the locations because they're crime thrillers, and some of the people might come looking for them.
Yes.
So I have to change the locale.
That's the same when you write memoirs and things. But I think for me, there are some things that I've written where I feel I'm writing about. But sometimes there was one story that I've written and I really like. It was a lot to do with surrogacy and the confusions of surrogacy and the confusions of gender and people who are, who perhaps lead a double life because of their sexual preferences and so on. So that's a very good story actually. But again, people I knew. Again, I found myself using, it was a novel, but all of these people were people, a lot of them were people I knew that I was building it around.
So have you decided on what you're going to, on the next book, or is it still like a work in progress?
Oh, we know what we're doing in the second book, but I'd like as well to put a couple of the other ones out there. I'm going to have to talk to Karen about that when she gets back. And have them, they're pretty well edited, the other ones, but I've just never got round to doing anything with them. So I might do that once she gets back. The actual novel. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's been wonderful talking to you. We've sort of run out of time here.
Time's gone nice and quickly. I thought it would be such a long time.
We've been chatting around here for 45 minutes. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Yeah. Can I just say before we go, because it sounded like the girl has had this harrowing, terrible journey, but I need to read the last part of this book, this little part, the paragraph, because the once independent, vivacious young woman was to discover the man she thought she knew was in fact a total stranger, someone she had no idea existed in the person she first met. Trapped on an isolated property in an abusive and controlling relationship, living in denial and cover-up, she somehow, and this is the important part, she somehow finds the woman who was always within her, the resourceful survivor she had lost sight of. So there is the rising of the phoenix, she does come out, she does take on.
I think I can't, because I tell you what I identify as. I can't write that. But I write crime thrillers. But I mean, I think you should continue on that. I think it's a great theme to keep continuing on.
So she does pull herself out, but after reaching suicidal territory, So it's wonderful. Yeah. So we're all capable of that too, Mike.
Yeah. All right. We're going to have to say goodbye now.
Good night. It's quite late.
I'm going to close the video.
I'm going to get myself some dinner tonight.
Okay. All right. Cheers, Victor. Bye.
Cheers, Mike. Enjoyed talking.